My name is Marie McGillicuddy, and I'm the Vice President of Admissions here at UMHS. And I'm delighted to guide you tonight and be the MC for this very special live stream. Back in February, we hosted a similar live stream event that focused on the non-traditional path to becoming a doctor. I was joined by my colleague, Patrick McCormick, as we discussed admissions and the path to residency for non-traditional med students. If you'd like to see that, that's actually on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to see what that was all about. It was a fantastic discussion. And because of that event, it generated a ton of interest. And so we decided to host another event that centered on the personal experiences of non-traditional med students. And tonight we put together this panel so you can hear firsthand from both a current student and alumni to learn what it's like to change careers, go back to school, and in some cases, even move your entire family as you pursue your dream of becoming a doctor. We'll discuss some of the unique challenges of taking an alternative path to med school, special considerations, and give you an opportunity to ask questions. We're going to focus on a few areas this evening. We're going to, before I introduce everybody, give you a little bit of a rundown of what we're going to discuss tonight. We're going to talk about why medical school and what it's like to be a non-traditional student. We're going to talk about the opportunities of attending a school in the Caribbean, and we're going to talk about what it's like to have a family there and bringing a family down and some of those pros and struggles and all that good stuff. And tonight, I'm very pleased to welcome back one of our alumni, Dr. Aaron Vasquez, who actually hosted another live stream event back in October. That particular live stream focused on suicide prevention and the state of psychiatry. And I do urge all of you to watch that. That's also on our YouTube channel. And so with that, I'd actually like to start off with Dr. Vasquez. If you can come on and jump on here, introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you're from, what you're currently practicing, where you're currently practicing, that would be great.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me back. It's nice to be back with family. So I'm originally from South Carolina. That's where I was born. My dad was in the Air Force, so we lived in a lot of places throughout the country growing up. I'm currently living in Southern Utah, St. George, Utah, and I'm practicing with Intermountain Healthcare. I'm the medical director for behavioral health services here at our hospital for inpatient psychiatry. Yeah, that's kind of my my rundown. I did my residency at Case Western Reserve, 4-year psychiatry residency. And of course, I wouldn't be on here if I didn't attend and graduate from UMHS prior to that. So thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Vasquez. And of course, we're going to jump back to you in just a moment. Dr. Keita, if you can go ahead and come on, jump on here, who you are, where you're from, where you went to school, and what you're currently doing.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me as well. So my name is Papus Keita. I'm a 2016 UMHS grad. I'm originally from Guinea, West Africa. My family moved to the US when I was in high school. I attended college at the Citadel, the military college of South Carolina. So in the US, I consider South Carolina home as well. From there, I took a professional detour in soccer, played for a couple of years prior to matriculating to UMHS as a medical student. Currently, I'm a 5th-year general surgery resident, and my plan is to pursue a fellowship. Seems like I'm following Aaron Vasquez around, but I'm headed to Case Western next year for a cardiothoracic surgery fellowship.
Fantastic. Oh my gosh, I'm so like starstruck. I feel, listening to both of you and your backgrounds and what you're doing right now. So it's definitely an honor to be here and to moderate this conversation. And last but definitely not least, Evelyn, if you can come on, jump up here. Evelyn is a current student of ours. If you can tell everybody where you're from, who you are, what your current semester is, and all that good stuff.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Evelyn Brewster. I am a current student at UMHS. I'm finishing up my 2nd year, getting ready to sit for step 1 and then start my clinicals probably sometime in January. I am from the San Francisco Bay Area in California, and I did my undergraduate at University of California, Davis. Took about 6 years off from school and then came to UMHS.
Fantastic. Thank you, Evelyn. What an amazing group that we have here tonight to have this discussion. Before we actually jump into the discussion, I want to invite everyone to submit any questions that you'd like to ask any one of the members here. All you got to do is just type it in the little chat box. I'm pointing as if you can see it, but you'll see a little chat area here. You just click on that button right there, and you can put any of your questions there, and we'll definitely get to all of them throughout this presentation. So I'd like to first start off by actually asking everybody individually why you decided to become a physician and where you were before you made that choice that, okay, I'm going to put a pause what I'm doing right now, and I'm going to move on down to the Caribbean. Well, first research where to get into medical school, and then move down to the Caribbean for med school. Why med school? Dr. Vasquez, I'd like to start with you first.
Yeah, I think the simple answer to that is I wanted a stable, secure future for myself. And I was, at the time I made that decision, was in a very volatile industry. I worked in telecom, and there was just mergers and acquisitions, and that was anxiety provoking, having already started a family. And at that time I had a degree in psychology, and you can't really support a family with just a bachelor's degree in psychology. And so I decided to go back to school, and it was really a decision to either pursue a PhD or MD. And I kind of knew I wanted to go into mental health. Aside from testing, I realized that, my training would include in my residency after medical school, a lot of the things that someone might get in their PhD training in terms of mental health. And so, plus additional, training. And so I just thought, that would be a better match for me. Obviously, working in business, there's many rewarding things about that, but it's somewhat transactional. You try to bring value to your customers and things, but it's surface level. Never got to know any of my customers too well, whereas I kind of went to the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of getting to know people. In psychiatry, we talk a lot about taboo topics and things that, people avoid, talking about their personal lives. And that's very rewarding to me. And I found that more rewarding than staying in business.
Great. Thank you so much. Dr. Keita, how about yourself?
Sure. So I was actually born in a medical family, so to speak. My father is a vascular surgeon. My mother is a nurse. We moved to the United States under difficult circumstances because of the political climate in Guinea and West Africa as a whole at the time. So the long story short is that I had early exposure, and going to college, I intended on going to medical school already. That said, I took a detour because I was an athlete. I was a Division I soccer player. And that was going well in college, so I pursued a professional career. That was unfortunately plagued by injury, but there was always a plan to return to academics and go to medical school after a predetermined amount of time in the soccer arena. So once I decided that soccer was just not going to work out, as I mentioned, due to my injuries, I eventually got back in school and chose to go to UMHS. Now, the reason as to why I went to UMHS, I was applying, and I was initially actually interested in going back to France because French is my first language. I was familiar with the curriculum, and also I just wanted to go back to there's a specific school that I wanted to go to where I had family in the area. But that said, when I came across a seminar that UMHS was holding, I thought it was a very interesting concept, going to school down in the Caribbean, basically on what I call Paradise Island, and getting a phenomenal education, having the opportunity to transition back to the US without having so many barriers that I would have had by going to school in France. So the long story short is that I applied to UMHS. I intended on applying to the US as well. However, I was able to matriculate earlier, and rather than waiting a certain number of potential years, I decided to take the leap and go down to the Caribbean. So my journey there was amazing. It was a good time on the island. Since then, it's been challenging in surgery, because that's ultimately what I chose to go into. But the reason for choosing surgery is simply because of my early exposure. But at the time of my rotations, I had great rotations and exposure throughout my third and fourth year, and it really kind of solidified my interest in just the pragmatic nature of surgery. And so that is ultimately what led me to where I am now.
Fantastic. Evelyn, I'm going to throw it over to you. How about yourself?
So I first heard about UMHS back in, I believe it was 2012 or 2013. So a very long time ago at UC Davis during a college fair. And I was very attracted to the school. And at that time I did my research. I also knew my statistics for different US schools. And I really settled on UMHS as the school of choice for me due to different things I wasn't able to go at the time. And then years down the road, I worked in every industry: medical, banking, restaurant, retail, everything. And I also became a single mother. And I realized that my bachelor's wasn't enough to get a job where I could financially support a household by myself for my son and I. So I decided it was time to go back to school. I didn't want to wait on a year plus application process. UMHS fortunately has rolling admissions. And also I loved that UMHS, the class sizes were so small, very much one-on-one learning. And I also researched St. Kitts a bit, and it looked like a great place for my son to have his first few years growing up.
Great, thank you so much. And again, I want to remind the audience, feel free to ask any questions here. We have a couple questions that came in, and one of them is, looking back, what advice do you have for people considering a career change and going back to medical school? I'll give you a little bit of context there. We get a lot of calls from non-traditional students even in their 30s and 40s and sometimes in their 50s, and they're they're very anxious on the phone, and they say, you know, I can't do this. I can't just stop and put my current career behind or push my family to the side. What advice would you have for them? And Dr. Keita, I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, I have to say that medical school requires a certain level of commitment. And that's a high level of commitment. That said, when you're changing career, I think that you really, prior to doing that, need to do some soul searching and determine whether this is truly what you want to do and what you envision your next couple of years being like, in the context of potentially not earning a certain income that you earned previously. The fact that attending UMHS will mean you have to uproot your family, whether you're moving by yourself or moving with family. You potentially have to uproot to a certain degree, whether it's yourself or the whole family, but go to an island that is probably foreign to you. And is it all worth it? You know, so the first step, I think, in the algorithm is deciding how badly you want to become a physician, especially if there's a specific track within medicine that attracts you. And if you determine that this is truly what you want to do, and you don't want to look back in regrets, take the opportunity now to pursue it while you still can, then you have to determine the sacrifices that you potentially will have to make. And so if ultimately it all levers or levels out or favors attending medical school, I think that then you just have to have some deliberate planning. If you have a significant other and you have kids, that requires very good communication, because you'll be absent a lot for studying, and while you're on rotations, you'll be at the hospital a lot. So it requires a certain buy-in from your family as well. And so having an honest discussion, first soul searching, then having a discussion with the family, making sure you have buy-in, I think is the most important thing that you can do. Everything else will be more or less the same as your colleagues that that are not changing career in terms of, yes, it will be challenging and you'll have to study and you'll have a few sleepless nights, but that's common in medical school as a whole. So that would be, I think those would be the two big pieces of advice that I would give.
Okay, great. Evelyn, I'll bring you back on here because you said that you were interested at UMHS back in 2012 and 2013. What advice would you give people considering a career change or the timeline and so on, based on your own experience?
So I think the biggest question, at least my biggest question when I made that decision is it worth it? From my personal experience at the time, I reapplied to UMHS and got in 6 years later. I was looking at my friends and they had been done with med school. They had been a couple years into their residency. And, that was a big motivation for me, and just seeing, how life could be if I commit to this right now. Whereas I could wait another few years, and I'm just backtracking that even more. One thing I will say for students that are considering a career change and going back to school, and specifically med school, there's two things that you'll have that most other students don't have because they're coming straight from their undergrad. You're having a whole different set of motivation. You know what it's been like in a past career that you might not enjoy as much. So you're going to work extra hard so that you can make this your career and your life choice. You also, if you have a family, that's a whole nother motivation. When I get really tired at the end of the day, I look at my son and I'm like, okay, this is why I'm here. Keep going. Let's go. And the other thing you have that a lot of your counterparts will not have is experience. I was actually in my preceptorship this week, and he said that's one thing he really notices in older students or students that took a break between undergrad and med school, is they're able to have actual conversations with their patients that aren't surrounding their medical condition. Also, if you have a background in customer service, that really helps with your patient relations. Or let's say you did, like in his case, he did construction, and your patient or patient's family is working construction, and they're taking some really bad news, but you take a break, like, well, tell me what else is going on in your life. And you can actually have a real conversation with your patients. So you definitely have a leg up on other people. So if you're worried about, will I make it? Is it worth it? You're already ahead of the game. So that would be not so much my advice, but my insight into that question of, is it worth it changing my career at this point?
Thank you, Evelyn. And Dr. Vasquez, what advice would you give, and how can students prepare for success?
It's helpful if you're poor, I think. It's helpful if you have mouths to feed. It's helpful if you don't have a plan B, no safety net, you're all in. I'm speaking from experience. Didn't start out poor, but by the time I finished residency, I was ready to move into attending life. I echo obviously what Papoose and Evelyn said. I don't want to be redundant about that. I think it's important to imagine your future self where you're at today, and imagining your future self sitting in a lounge chair, at the beach in St. Kitts on your time off, and also in the classroom. Imagine your future self. And if you can't imagine what that self would be looking like, talking like, feeling like, then I would recommend going to St. Kitts beforehand and taking a tour of the island, taking a tour of the school. I'm speaking from experience. That's what me and my wife did. And that was very helpful to help us visualize, what that could look like for us. I also think some people like to kind of hedge their bets later in life. If this doesn't work out, maybe this could work out. I think that there's too many difficult days ahead of you once you start going down this path, that if there is one of least resistance, it's too tempting, to fall back on that, to go down that. So in my case, where I owned a small business, I sold it. I had no interest in it anymore. I had no jobs. Like, I had a nest egg, and off I went. And failure wasn't an option. You know what I mean? It was more than just me. So obviously, you know, some of these things are very individualistic. You know, everyone's different, you know, resources that they do have, don't have, whether you can travel ahead of time or not, whether you have, you know, plenty of money in the bank or your family does. So if things don't work out for you, then you still have, you know, other alternatives. But I would say if you can kind of craft a situation for yourself where you can see yourself in the future, and part of that is not having a plan B, that's going to work to your advantage.
Thank you, Dr. Vasquez. I want to actually stay on with you for a second here, because you brought up a couple good points here, is to visit the school, explore the school. We do have a virtual tour, so for anyone watching, feel free to hop on our website and just click on the virtual tour, and it's literally like, you know, those cool little gadgets, they call them, like an Oculus gadget. I don't know, that's maybe that's too old for that, or whatever. Maybe I just need to go buy one and put it on. But you can actually walk through all of the classrooms and the anatomy lab and everything. So I definitely encourage you, if you can't just hop on a plane and go down there and check out St. Kitts and the campus, to definitely view our virtual tour. But how did you hear about UMHS, Dr. Vasquez, and why did you even consider UMHS?
Yeah, that's a good story. This isn't going to look too great for me, but and telling this story doesn't, you know. But basically, I mentioned I was a psychology major, and so in that major, you don't need to do organic chemistry, physics, you know, biology. You don't need to do all the pre-med stuff, right? Because you're going to take a GRE if you're going to go into, you know, PhD. So for me, you know, I had to go back after I had my degree, you know, knock out these prerequisites. And in the process of doing that, I realized I stink at this. Like, I am not good at the hard sciences, soft sciences all day. I'm a people person, right? But the, you know, the weeder classes, those types of above the shoulder mustard stuff, you know what I mean? Like very, that I'm just, you know, wasn't really, I think, built or trained for. Nothing really gave me experience to really succeed in those type of like weeder classes. Part of that was just, I don't think I was disciplined earlier in my life academically. Wasn't ready to push through those challenging courses. I didn't have enough confidence, I think, at that time. And so I made it through those classes. I passed them, you know, those prerequisites, but I learned something about myself. And that was, I'm not a good test taker when it comes to organic chemistry. You know, give me all the models you want and put in my hand. I'm just not gifted with that. And so, you know, I think I was kind of grandfathered in 2014, 15, before the days of MCAT at UMHS. So I knew that I didn't want to take the MCAT because I knew I wouldn't do well on it. I never applied to a US school. I only applied to UMHS. And the attractive thing, besides being at so I bumped into UMHS because they had a table set up at my undergrad alongside our state school. And this one had a beach behind it, you know, and, you know, the island, yeah, like you have. And then the other one was red for the University of Utah. And so, you know, I just, I don't know if Leon's still around, but I think it was Leon Mattingly back then. He, I think, was that, you know, recruiter. And, you know, I just kind of, you know, good vibes, you know, with that. And, but the magic words for me were no MCAT. I'm like, okay, cool. I'll go out there, check it out. If it all pans out, that's the way for me, because I knowing I had kind of studied the path, and I knew that I could do well on like boards and things like that. But again, those basic science classes, you know, I wasn't going to do well. So I try to avoid something that would be kind of probably like make my confidence go even lower, you know, in terms of those doing, you know, succeeding in those types of things. So that's kind of how I found UMHS, kind of, you know, why I picked UMHS. There's just a lot of positives. They've already spoken about some of them. You know, once I went out, I toured it. You know, for me, it was, you know, the end was always, you know, in view, like, where do I want to be? And UMHS was a big piece of that road. And so getting there and getting through that was, part of it.
Super. Thank you. And the MCAT, back in the days, it was a completely different exam than what it is now. And we do require the MCAT. It's important for us because it helps us determine what the entry point is for students. We have 3 entry points. We have the medical school. Medical school is typically 4 years, and you have the standard med program where the basic sciences is 4 semesters. Then we have an extended basic sciences program where you take those 4 semesters and you extend them into 5 semesters. So you're not, taking a pretty strict load. Then we also have what's called the accelerated review program, which is 1 semester before med school. And the best way that I like to visualize this is where you have to be in order to start medical school. And let's say you're a non-traditional student, you didn't do well on the MCAT, you've been out of school for a few years. So we might put you into the accelerated review program, or if your GPA wasn't strong, so that accelerated review program is going to bring you right up to here where you need to be. Because what's important to us here at UMHS is the quality, not quantity, it's the quality. We want to make sure that whatever students are coming in, that y'all are going to make it to the end, at the end of the day. Not just taking students in to take in. So the MCAT essentially will help us determine what area a student needs to come into. It's absolutely vital. And there is no minimum. We don't have minimum MCATs or minimum GPAs. It's really a conversation. What we like to tell students is it's going to be half based on your academics and the other half based on your interview. Why the heck you want to do this for the rest of your life? And especially being a non-traditional student, seeing everybody on here tonight, you're taking a risk. You're literally walking away from the comforts and creatures of your whole life, and you're doing this for 5+ years. And with that, Dr. Keita, a question came in, and I want to throw this over to you because your interest obviously is in surgery. That's what you're doing. You're eating, breathing, and sleeping every single day. That's your passion. 2 questions for you. One is, did you have any concerns about going to medical school in the Caribbean? And then I'll ask you the second one after that. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I was doing my research in terms of attending medical school in the Caribbean, which was a new concept to me, because it was either France or the US. That was my initial path, so or algorithm anyway. So when that thought came to mind, I did a lot of research, and it seemed like it was a challenge. It seemed like it would be a challenge going to school offshore, trying to come back to the US and go and get into surgery. So basically, I was at a fork in the road where I could apply, based on the timeline, I could apply to school in the US and potentially wait a year or 2 to get in. And I had been advised that I wasn't a citizen at the time and it would be difficult and I'd meet all these challenges just because I was on a green card status. So anyway, so that wasn't looking very promising, at least not in the immediate future. Meanwhile, UMHS, I could apply for the upcoming start date. So that said, I had those concerns. I can't say that I didn't, but I'm also a guy that went to the Citadel for undergrad. Same guy that played athletics in a competitive way, or at least at a competitive level is what I mean. And so those challenges really they didn't deter me. I thought to myself, if it's hard work that's needed, then really that should not be a factor. So ultimately, that's really what it came down to. It was just a lot of hard work. And yes, I got to say that there's some challenges with going into surgery. I'm pretty sure I'm probably the only or first or only UMHS person to go into cardiac surgery. But at the end of the day, honestly, if you put in the work, a lot of it will pan out. Things will work out. So it doesn't matter whether you graduate from Harvard Medical School or University of South Carolina or UMHS. Ultimately, people appreciate work ethic and people appreciate dedication to the field of surgery. And that's manifested throughout your rotations. Obviously, some of it in your scholarly activity and your academic portfolio, but a lot of it also throughout your rotations. So I thought it was a challenge. I just decided to tackle it.
Yeah, I appreciate what you said, that, basically what it comes down to at the end of the day is yourself. You're fully responsible for your own success. You put in the work, you're going to get whatever you want at the end of the day. And to add on, we actually have a very specific question for you. It's about pursuing orthopedics. I know that it's not necessarily what you're doing specifically, but if you can provide any insight or any advice on how one can go about that. We get that question a lot from non-traditional students.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad question at all. Whether you're applying to, so actually, to give you some context, at the conclusion of medical school, I actually did not apply to I think I only applied to one or two, or to a couple of general surgery programs. I applied to integrated cardiothoracic surgery, which is actually, it's very competitive and very difficult to get in. But the bottom line is, it doesn't really matter what specialty you're applying to with regards to the algorithm for getting in. There are a couple of things that you need, and it doesn't matter what specialty. Now, obviously, if the reality of it is that if it's competitive, and especially as a foreign graduate or an international medical graduate, if there hasn't been much of a track record of IMGs to get into that field, then sure, you'll face some extra challenges. But what it boils down to is, one, scores, which now USMLE step 1 is pass fail, as I understand it. So that may make it a little bit more challenging, because if you would have scored a 260 on step 1, you would have stood out. But now that's no longer the case. However, you need to do well in your classes. You need to do well in your USMLE step 2 if that's still scored. 2 is working hard on your rotations. But with that, also networking. Networking will take you a long way. And in addition to those 3, I would say trying to do some research, because the research box is becoming, that you need to check off, is becoming more and more important, especially in the context of a pass-fail USMLE. So now your focus needs to be shifted. And when I say research, I don't mean take a year or 2 out of school to do research, but trying to publish some case reports, trying to essentially check that box, showing that you've got some publications that you can probably pick up during your rotations. At least that's what I did. And so once you check those boxes, that opens a lot of doors. And the doors that you want, and the fashion in which you want those doors to be open, is by having a sponsor, some attending champion that will make phone calls for you, and that will reach out to their old program, or to where they have friends that are program directors, to reach out and essentially get your foot in the door. That's going to require them to be sold on the fact that you're a special candidate. And the only way they're going to be sold is by you showing up and demonstrating that ultimately you're worth it. So I think that's where I would start. And then I would not neglect the importance of interviews, as you mentioned earlier, with regards to UMHS admission. That is, I would say, equally as important in surgical interviews, including orthopedic surgery. So when you get the opportunity to interview, you've got to have your head up high, shoulders back, and present yourself in a way that will convince the committee that you're worth being a trainee in their program. So I think no matter the specialty, those are the elements that really it boils down to.
Super, thank you. And you mentioned research, and that is absolutely just as important as well. And we have incorporated a research elective within the curriculum now, so students will be able to. You don't have to take time off to do that, like you said before, and you shouldn't. And Dr. Fukuya, who's one of our professors and a head of one of our departments, and he oversees the research program here at UMHS. And during orientation, what he does is he gives a rundown of really what research is, because when a lot of students join medical school, they have this different idea of research. But when you become, a physician, you're doing research for the rest of your life. You're learning about your specialty. You have to keep on top of everything. So you'll be able to have the opportunity to do that here at UMHS. Not on the level of a U.S. med school, because a U.S. med school receives millions and millions of dollars federal government to specifically focus on research. It's not at that level. We're not a research school like that. But Dr. Vasquez, if you can jump in here and actually expound a little bit more on maybe what your experience is, or what what would make somebody stand out for their residency appointment? Maybe if you can walk everybody along how it was for you and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Oh, well, I have a lot to say about that, but I'll keep it brief. I think that for me personally and for others, we can't underestimate the value of human skill. Papoose talked about getting a champion, someone who can plead your case, right? Get a good connection, right? And I can tell you that's not going to happen if you don't have human skill. Doesn't matter how well you can cut, doesn't matter how well you can sew, doesn't matter how well you can, do other things, right? If you can't be a team player, if you can't connect, with a variety of different people, you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle in medical school. You're going to struggle making the connections you need to make to get to the place that you want to be, especially if it's competitive. So when Papoose was talking about research, that's kind of where I had a bit of an advantage. I'll tell you though, quick tidbit is very interesting. I had committed my life to pursue, psychiatry once I left business behind, and I was devastated come November that I didn't have any interviews, and I applied broadly, and I was just beside myself, like, how can this be? My scores are okay. They're within range. I have publications, but I didn't fully understand the game. I thought I did. Years later, when I became a chief resident, I really understood, things that I had heard. But part of the story is the thing that gave me the most confidence was when Papoose made a phone call to one of his friends that I think he went, a famous psychiatrist now, Nolan. And I can't remember exactly how you guys knew each other, but he got me an interview. So my contact started in med school, and that contact was with Papoose. Was if I had mistreated him, he would not have called in a favor for me. Okay, and that's exactly what it was. I got an interview at a top-notch program, MUSC, for psychiatry because of Papoose. Okay, that's the only reason. And shortly after that happened, I got 13 others in the last, month leading up to the deadline. So it was a sprint, and going from here to there to there. Back then we did the interviews in person, of course. So I'm just kind of reemphasizing human skill, the importance of making connections, and it's never too early to start being a humanist, being humanistic in your interactions with people. And so some of this can be taught, some of this, hopefully as a professional, going in, you already have these skills. As a non-traditional student, I say, have an advantage because you've been in the workforce, you've been dealing with that. I think the best way, like advice I could give about getting into the specialty of choice is look at this as a serious game. It's a game. And I say that because if you approach it with curiosity and a playful nature, and that it's going to be better than approaching it with anxiety and fear about not matching or not going into it in that way. And if you're curious, right, that's going to lend to opportunities, right, to continue learning and growing and picking up on things maybe you otherwise wouldn't have recognized if you're not curious in people and curious in the game. And when I talk about game, it's everyone should know the average publications, that people have, and that required specialty, like those who match and those who didn't. For US, and I don't know if this is still published, it should be, I think, through ERAS or one of those, where you can see, like how many volunteer hours on average for my specialty, how many other, so you need to know the filters that are being used to get you filtered out or filtered in. And then playing the game is being sure you're above the average, right? You want to look great going in. And so that's kind of the quantitative aspect of matching into a program that you want, is identifying the areas that you're strong in, weak in, and then compensating for the areas that you perceive yourself to be weak in based on other candidates that are matching into your specialty. some of these things you can control, some of these things you can't control. So focus on the things that you can. You know, some things that I learned later that I didn't really appreciate is, you know, at least in my program, we regularly got well over 1,000 applications. We interviewed around 100 of those, and we hired at the time 8. I think they're up to maybe 9 or 10 residents now. So you go from 1,000, you know, down to 8 to 10. And so we can't, committees don't read 1,000 applications. You can't do it. These applications are so big, okay? And so there needs to be filters in order to get through the volume. And every program is different, what they prioritize, you know, what they could care less about. And so I think ultimately I got a lot of interviews at places that US students had already canceled, you know, like maybe canceled their residency. That's why I got them late in the season instead of like early in the season. Okay. And I matched in my number 1. And it was wonderful, you know. Yeah, I said probably a lot here. Like I warned you though, I had a lot to say about this.
No,
And
no,
if you don't mind, if I can punctuate what Aaron said, a couple of comments, and I'll make it very brief. Number one, him getting interviews has nothing to do with me. Aaron was awesome, and you know the people skills that he's talking about, I think we would have gotten him those interviews anyways. So you know, I'm glad I could make a phone call. But that said, you know, in terms of the human factor, I 100% agree. I mean, totally right. In terms of can you cut or not? Sure, it's good if you're going into surgery. Hopefully, you have some basic skills down, but people make phone calls based on your interaction with them. And I can tell you, being on, you know, on this side of the fence, also getting to interview residents now with, you know, first year residents that we're taking in. Now, a lot of it boils down to, yeah, I don't know. How did you guys feel about him? Or how did you guys feel about her? Right? If you've made it to the interview, the scores matter much less. And so those interactions, I can tell you that on Zoom, when the screen goes off, right after we're done interviewing, then we look at each other and we go, wow, he was awesome or she was awesome. And that's strictly based on the interview. So those interactions, especially as a non-traditional students, that you've probably, the skill that you've developed along the way, no matter what career path you've chosen before medical school, don't underestimate that. It will really come in handy. So
no,
sorry
that's
for taking
great.
more time.
No, I have one more question for both of you, because you've gone through this entire process, and then I'd like to move to talking about families and bringing your families along this journey here. So the last question in this area here is, did you face any kind of challenges being someone from a Caribbean med school, or any limitations, you know, coming from UMHS? Dr. Vasquez or Dr. Keita, whoever wants to take it first, you both can take it. Yep.
Challenges in getting into residency, or getting into being attending, or
both. Any, if you had any.
I think once you're in residency, no one cares. No one asks you where you go to medical school. At least in my situation, I mean, your close colleagues, you know where they went to school because you work close with them, but you interact with like hundreds of residents in different specialties and stuff, and nobody cares. You know, you're at that phase of your life. So, you know, your degree is a paper on the wall, piece of paper, you know, on the wall. And I mean, it's more to that because to you it does, but to other people, nobody's asked me where I went to med school I've been practicing 3 years now at a residency program. I mean, for at least 4 or 5, I don't know, a lot of time, long time. It's rare when that conversation comes up, but I'm always happy to talk about it because it's unique. You know, in terms of getting into residency, sure, that's one of those filters. You know, I think that there's some programs that are IMG, FMG friendly, and others that are less so. And so that's why I think the advice is to apply broadly. You know, because maybe you're not quite sure how open to being from a Caribbean medical school. You know, one particular program in a particular specialty is going to be. Again, I can't say that it worked. You know, it worked against me because I got, you know, the program that I ranked number 1, and so I can't say in any way that it did. And I'll tell you, my score on USMLE when they did score it was 205. I think the average was like 220. So I wasn't a top candidate, you know, and I think the average to get into psychiatry at that time was around 225, 230. So USMLE step one scores, I was, you know, that was one of those boxes I couldn't check, you know, confidently. But everything else that I could control after that test was taken, I did try to be competitive. So.
And Dr. Keita, did you come encounter with any challenges or any limitations, if any?
Yeah, I think that for surgery, there is definitely it's definitely an uphill battle, and that's what, as I mentioned earlier, you know, I knew it was going to be a challenge, and you know, nevertheless, I decided to tackle it. So I can tell you what I think, but I can also tell you what I know. I've spoken to several program directors, and you know, the theme has been, if you are a foreign graduate, you will be filtered out unless I hear about it from someone that I know or someone makes a phone call. And that's the importance behind networking. Simply because, like Aaron said, two things that Aaron said that I want to again accentuate. One, you have to know the game. You have to know what people look for. And if there are obstacles along the way, you have to know how to overcome them or get around them. Two, in terms of actually, that's the main point that I want to accentuate. And so, with regards to those challenges in surgery, I think the biggest factor for me was getting a foot in the door. If I could rotate, I've always believed in boots on the ground, because I think that if I show up and I put in the work, I'll be the first one there. I'll be the last to leave. I'll be inquisitive, and I will work harder than any other resident or any other medical student that you've had. That's simply, I truly believe that. And so if you put in that work ethic, it doesn't matter whether you're trying to go into general surgery, orthopedic surgery, there will be challenges, but you will have opportunities. Not sure if they'll ultimately pan out, but if you work hard enough and you're able to socially, quote unquote, fit in well enough, then you will have opportunities. So there are definitely challenges, but I'd say that you just have to understand the game to understand how to overcome them.
Can I make one comment to piggyback on him? He talked about being confident and work harder than others. I think that's important. But to counterbalance that, you also have to be teachable. And so there's a balance between being confident. He said inquisitive, right? It's a good word, actually, I think. And he also said earlier that once you've made it to the interview, you know, what's on the paper doesn't matter anymore because you've already been filtered in for the interview. Now it's about kind of the human skill. How did you interview? Did you interview well? Something that we looked for is, is this medical student, can we teach them something, or do they think they know it all already? You know, because you've had to be vested in that. You've done research, you've published, hopefully you've made contacts, you are showing genuine interest. So you already know, I mean, quite a bit for a medical student going into surgery, for example, or into psychiatry in my case. But can you make yourself present as someone who can be humble and teachable? That's important.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance, and that line can be very, very blurry sometimes. And so it's important to be able to convey confidence, but that's why, yeah, exactly, I use the word inquisitive, because you just want to show dedication and commitment to the rotation. But socially, you also got to be cautious, because ultimately, honestly, what it boils down to is, did they like you enough? And if you come across with a, head up high and you think you know it all, you're just not going to cross that quote unquote, did they like me enough box. So yeah, I agree. You got to be cautious with how much confidence you convey, that it doesn't tip over onto the arrogant side of the spectrum.
100%. I think we need to get y'all down to the St. Campus, the St. Kitts campus, so that you can speak to the students there. It's just so motivating listening to both you speak. But you're spot on. You're spot on. It's a fine balance between what you know, and really just sitting in front of somebody and trying to figure out, can I put up with this program for X amount of years, and can that program put up with you for X amount of years? That's how I like to put it in simple terms. And we actually have a great department here at UMHS that's run by Patrick McCormick and his team, where they will work with all students toward the end of your years, and they'll guide you on how many residency programs you should be applying to, because you both are spot on. There's thousands of residency programs there, but there are certain programs that say we are not IMG friendly, or they'll say we don't accept IMGs. And IMG stands for International Medical Graduate, and students that go to schools in the Caribbean are grouped with students that go to school in Ireland, in India, in the United Kingdom, so on, all over the globe. And there are specific hospitals that say, no, we will not look at applications from IMGs. But the Dean, Patrick McCormick and team, they will work with every student to say, okay, you need to add more hospitals to your list, and these are the hospitals that you should look at, and they'll help you all the way to make sure that you're making the right choices and enough choices so that you can be marketable. That's the best way to say it, so that you can be marketable at the end of the day. Thank you guys for that. Now I want to completely switch it up because we do have some questions about families. And this is probably the number one question that we get from non-traditional students when they call in, when they're on live chat with us. They say, I have a son or daughter, or I have a massive family. What do I do? Do I leave them? Do I take them? Do I stay or do I go? Like a little song plug in there. And Evelyn, I want to start off with you, because you stated you're a single mom. How did you do this? If you don't mind sharing your experience, I think that will be definitely an insight for a lot of folks. Talk about, along with, should I bring my family down? What about the school system? Are they going to fit in? All that stuff. Tell us how it was for you and how the little guy's doing.
So luckily for me, my mom retired when I got into med school, and she offered to move out there with me. So the three of us, her, myself, and at the time he was a year and a half, my son moved to St. Kitts. There was definitely a lot of questions about, schooling, healthcare for him, activities, all those things. But for me, it was this is the only option, and it's just going to work. And luckily it worked very well. Got to St. Kitts within the first month of being there, found an amazing Montessori school that's within a 5-10 minute drive from campus. They also are very good with students who have autism, as well as students who have ADHD. So if you do have a child who's on the spectrum or has some learning difficulties, they really cater to that. Extremely loving school. The faculty and staff there is amazing. And that's just the one I have my son go to, and that's Diligent Hands. There's a few other schools that our professors send their children to, some other Montessoris. There's a Catholic school. There's a Canadian-based school. So lots of schooling options. Medical-wise, great pediatricians on island, great family medicine clinics, as well as I found out last Friday, emergency dentists, because my son's still in St. Kitts and he had an incident and he almost knocked his 2 front teeth out. But he's doing much better now, but amazing dental care there as well. And the prices there are very good for medicine, just prescriptions as well as medical care. Formulas on the island, diapers, wipes. I know that was a big thing for me. I wondered about when I first got there as well.
Great, thank you. Dr. Vasquez, can you tell everybody a little bit about your story? You brought your whole family down, right?
Yeah, I don't think mine was quite as challenging. I came with my wife, and which allowed me to I wasn't doing double duty, like Evelyn probably did as mom, and so I think like if you can have support like that, Evelyn sounded like she had her mother to help. In my case, my wife was very helpful. We had 3 kids under 10. I think their ages were like 5, 7, 9 or around there. You know, looking back now, it's funny because, you know, I have one son who's 20 living in Africa. We have another one that's getting ready to leave, and we're almost empty nesters. It was so important to prepare them for some international experiences that they would experience later in life, to have that exposure. At the time, we came from a state that's not very diverse. Utah is mostly white, I still think. And so it was uncomfortable, you know, to be honest. Sometimes the locals there, you know, like wanted to touch their hair and see what that was like, you know. And they weren't used to the attention, you know. It wasn't like negative attention, but sometimes for kids, more attention than other kids are getting can be kind of, you know, taken as like, oh, I'm not too comfortable with that. So, you know, it was, you know, they had to acclimate, and we were on kind of like a tight budget. And so they started out at a public school there that just was like close by where we lived. And, you know, that wasn't a good fit. So then they went to another school and they did better there. And then again, it was only 18 months, so it's not a ton of time. And then my wife ended up leaving a couple months before I did. So I think they were there, I think a little bit over a year. And then I was there for the full time. So there's a period of a couple months where, you know, I was there alone towards the end. But I mean, I think the principle here is, at least in my experience, the younger the children, the easier the transition, and in turn, the older they get, it can be, you know, just like for all of us as we get older, you know, we get a little bit more fixed in our ways and opinions and certain ideas, and, you know, mom and dad, I don't want to move, and, you know, right, where when they're younger, you know, they don't have quite as much pool in the family and stuff, you know, they're more persuadable. So it would have been challenging, I think, if I had waited longer to go to UMHS, because the traveling is not done. You know, if you go to the Caribbean, you know, you still have a main, and then, you know, you still have rotations, and then you still have a residency. So for that reason, I say, my advice would be to, you know, come while your kids are young, if you can control that.
Thank you. And Evelyn, I want to throw it back to you. What are some of the maybe biggest misconceptions that people might have who are possibly considering taking their kids down, their families down? Anything that you can think of?
So I know when we initially looked at basset online and things like that, it said it was high crime, not necessarily the safest place to live. Once we were there, we did not feel that at all. We've had great experiences living on the island, and actually we were on the island during COVID, and during that time, most students that were in St. Kitts left. So we were very recognizable. My mom's a short white lady with gray hair. I am what I am, as you can see. And then my son has curly blonde hair. So, you know, little blondie and little Caucasian boy. But because we stood out so much, and because there's such a sense of community in St. Kitts, people watched our backs. Like, we would go to the park and there's really a sense of community. Everyone's watching the kids, everyone making sure everyone's okay. We'd go to a restaurant, and if one of the waiters didn't like the way someone looked when they were walking by, they just escorted them somewhere else. You know, they really looked out for us. So I always felt safe. My family's always felt safe out there. So I think that was a big misconception when we first came in, was that it might not be safe. And then the other thing I want to kind of build off on what Aaron said is, it's been great having Liam grow up in such a diverse place. The school he goes to, there's Caucasians there, there's people from Ghana, there's kids from Germany, from India, like all over the globe, which is great exposure for him. I am actually a little bit worried taking him back to the States because I think he's going to miss it so much there in St. Kitts. I would say the main misconception I had before going there was safety, and I felt extremely safe there.
Okay. And this question is for anyone. Is it expensive living in St. Kitts? That's actually the number 2 question after, family. Should I bring my family down? It's all about, how can I actually afford to do this?
So I came from, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, went to UC Davis. It's definitely cheaper in St. Kitts. I'll put that out there. You have a roommate, your rent should be $1,000 or less, probably around like $800. I recently came back to the States, and food is more expensive in the States than it was in St. Kitts because you do have a lot of fresh produce, local meat like chicken and fish, things like that. From my experience, where I lived in California and also I lived in Eastern Tennessee, it was pretty equal. And actually where I am right now in Portland, Maine, I would say it's actually a little bit more expensive than St. Kitts.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting because, we do get that question, can I afford groceries? Can I afford my rent? And I'm so glad that you actually addressed that about the rent, that, there are housing options available that even run as low as $500 a month. Once you're accepted, you'll have access to a housing database, and our housing director and team, they do such a fantastic job of going and visiting every single one of these sites. So there's hundreds of options in there, and you get to choose based on your, whatever your financial view is, your budget is. So that's really great. Thanks for addressing that. And lastly, before I close this out with going around and last minute words, Dr. Keita, if you don't mind me asking you had a slightly different experience. You got married during medical school. So what would be your advice for older students who might be married or in a committed relationship with someone during med school? Can you describe what that's like?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I'm a strong believer, as much as I mentioned all the hard work that's necessary to get to your end goal. I'm a strong believer in trying to not put your life on hold because of medical school or, the subsequent training. I know that sounds counterintuitive, maybe for someone that's in surgery, but, I think I got married in medical school. We have 2 kids now. My son is 5. My daughter is 2.5. We may have 1 or 2 more kids. Who knows? Maybe if we do this webinar in a year from now, I'll have some news for you. But, the bottom line is that I think ultimately what I mentioned at the very start of all this, communication, commitment, and buy-in are very important from a family standpoint. And that includes from a significant other standpoint. There has to be an understanding that, you're not going to be there for every breakfast and dinner. You'll be busy. There'll be some days when you're at the hospital all day or you're at school all day, and you come home, it's for a quick snack, and then you got to study, or you got to be in bed because you got to be back at the hospital very early. And sometimes it's a drought. Sometimes that goes on, not just for a couple of days, but if you're in a tough rotation that's going to last a couple of weeks, then that may be your lifestyle for a couple of weeks. So I think it's important to have communication with your significant other. That said, I think what I try to do is I try to really be home when I'm home. And so as busy as life may be outside of home, I really try to do a lot of my work very early in the morning, and be as productive as possible when I'm actually at the hospital on my downtimes, so that when I get home, I can actually be home, spend time with my kids, and spend time with my wife. So I think that has been my way of showing them that I'm committed, and that, the family life, as busy as things are right now, is my priority, and that, I will navigate through this phase of life, still trying to demonstrate to them that when I'm home, they're priority. And even when I'm not, I text my wife at home when I'm at work and between cases, just shooting a quick text and be like, hey, how's it going? Or, how was swim lesson for Isaiah today? Just to show that I'm involved, as busy as I am. So that's the biggest advice that I would give is, and last thing I'll also say, the significant of it, if they're not in medicine, they need to have a sobering realization of what life in medicine is like, especially in a training phase. Because I hear these complaints that people, are sometimes unhappy because their significant other had to give up this or that and the other because of their rotation or the way the chief of the service made the schedule. You know what? It's life in medicine. So they need to have a sobering idea of what that's like. And then with that as a baseline, show them that, but you'll always be priority, and I will make every effort to put you first. That's kind of my advice in a nutshell.
Thank you. And so I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And I just want to go around and give everyone some last minute words of advice or success for students that are kind of on the edge. Should I do this? I'm in my 30s, I'm in my 40s. I don't know. Am I nuts? Last minute words. Evelyn.
All right. So one thing we did touch on is, standing out as a student. And I think UMHS is one of the top schools in general, including med schools as well as Caribbean schools, to be able to stand out as a student. We have several clubs. We have a lot of opportunities within the community to volunteer. I myself, during my time in St. Kitts, I'll just give you a real quick rundown. I was president of AMSA, which is a US recognized medical association, American Medical Student Association, for a year. I was on the board for Because We Care, which is a club we have. I volunteered in the community numerous times, doing blood pressure checks, getting people to the emergency room if they were in hypertensive crisis, checking their blood sugar. I've done food drives. During COVID, I volunteered in the community with NEMA, which is their version of FEMA. I was actually recognized by the government of St. Kitts. I participated in a kidney research study. I could go on for a very long time. I've just been able to really add to my resume. And I had support to do that from, my professors. They told me about organizations I could volunteer with. Another one I really loved volunteering with was Essence of Hope Breast Cancer, which I did a lot of fundraising work as well as other volunteer work for them within the community. Also, UMHS is a small school. You have a lot more opportunity, and it's much easier to stand out as a student and really build up that resume and stand out even compared to your US counterparts when it comes to your residency.
Thank you. And Dr. Keita, any last minute words?
Yeah, do it. I think you should do it. I think, I had an awesome experience. I'm very happy I attended UMHS. I would not change anything. If I had the opportunity to go if I had applied and had the opportunity to go to school in the US, I still don't think I would have changed it. I think it was an awesome time on the island. I got to where I wanted to get to anyways, despite the challenges. Friends of mine and I, we often talk about how it was a chapter in our life that was so unique. And we just, it was just an incredible experience. You're on an island, with a volcano on one side and the ocean on the other side, and, a completely different cultural experience. And, at the end of the day, with regards to the education, I think it was second to none. I have never envied any other medical student that I rotated with at the time of my rotations. And, I up to this point in my training, I still look back at things that I learned at UMHS. So I just think that if you do your soul searching, as I've mentioned several times now, and you decide that this is truly what you want to do it, go for it. And if UMHS ends up the place that you end up, I think you'll have a really good experience. Just remember that when times are tough no matter what school you go to. So that's my final parting words and advice.
Dr. Vasquez?
Well, I'm not going to be as cheerleader like Papoose. Okay, I'm gonna say know thyself. Okay, don't do it necessarily. Know thyself. Do some introspection, which has already, of course, been put forward in this live stream. If you have a pattern of success in the past, that's highly predict. That will predict future success at UMHS. I would tell people that things aren't going to be spoon fed. Okay, you're going to have to go after your dream, what you want. There's going to be some challenges, of course, along the way, and your previous experiences of getting through difficult times, doing hard things, is going to fare well for you as you pursue this next step in your education. If you do that, very honest inventory, and perhaps you're not so sure, I would talk to more. I would think about it more. I would talk to other people. I would go visit. I would, but I think that anybody that has the capacity to remember things and good work ethic can succeed at UMHS, just like they could succeed potentially at a US school. For me, I have no regrets. It worked out very well for me. Took a lot of work, and I'm one of the reasons I'm always happy to contribute and do these things, because I'm very grateful for that opportunity. I applied to one school, I got into this school, and I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for UMHS. So thank you guys for everything you're doing to educate the future physicians, probably all over the world. I guess there's people practicing everywhere, maybe.
Thank you guys so much. Again, I know time is very precious, and I definitely want to get you guys back to your families right now. Thank you again for joining us. If anybody who's watching this tonight or in the future, or watching this right now, I should say, on YouTube, and you would like to get in contact with anybody here, you can go ahead and hop on our website. You can click on the live chat area, leave a message for us, let us know who you want to speak to, and we'll make sure that you get in contact with them. What's most important to us is that when you make that decision, that you have done your research and that you have spoken to as many current students and as many alumni as possible, so that once your decision is confirmed, that you're comfortable with that choice at the end of the day. We have a fantastic website. Make sure that you click on every single aspect of that website, do your research, take your notes. Any questions that you have, you can reach us on live chat 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. in the month of July and August, and then it's always 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. throughout the year. I'm giving my team a little bit of a summer break, make sure that they stop after 5 p.m. And you can always call in. If you don't get one of us, we'll call you back within a day or so, if not sooner. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm very proud of everybody on here tonight, and I'm proud of you once you join us or once you make that decision.